Billy Tipton became a legend in the golden age of jazz. He performed with giants like Sinatra and the Duke.
Hollywood's golden age was full of secrets. But some secrets were bigger than affairs or scandals. Some celebrities were living completely different lives than anyone imagined. They performed on stages, appeared in major films, and even influenced Supreme Court cases. The public saw exactly what they wanted them to see. But when these stars died, the truth finally came out. And it changed everything people thought they knew about identity, fame, and what was possible back then. Billy Tipton. Billy Tipton was born as Dorothy Lucille Tipton on December 29, 1914, in Oklahoma City. But the person the world came to know was a jazz musician named Billy, a man who built an entire life and career in music while hiding a truth that would only be revealed after death. What began in the 1930s as a desperate attempt to enter a male-dominated jazz world eventually became a full-time identity. And for more than 50 years, no one, not his friends, not his bandmates, not even the 5 women he called his wives, ever knew he had been assigned female at birth. It started quietly in Kansas City around 1933. Dorothy, still in high school and already known as Tippy, had fallen in love with jazz. But when she was barred from joining the school's all-male band, she took matters into her own hands. She started dressing as a man just to play music in public. In the desperate years of the Great Depression, female jazz players weren't getting hired, so she began binding her chest, lowering her voice, copying the look and walk of male performers. By 1940, she was living full-time as Billy Tipton, playing in small dance bands that traveled the Midwest. She gave up doctors altogether, afraid even a checkup might ruin everything. That decision would come back to haunt her. Billy's talent grew fast. During the 1940s, he toured through the Pacific Northwest with George Meyer's band, performing at clubs and dance halls across the region. He played hits like Flying Home and If I Knew Then, and even shared stages with stars like the Ink Spots and Billy Eckstine. He was known not just as a solid saxophonist and pianist, but also as a gentleman, someone who kept to himself and never got too personal. In 1951, he formed the Billy Tipton Trio in Longview, Washington. The group found quick success, and by 1956, they were performing at King's Supper Club in Santa Barbara, a Hollywood hangout where film stars often watched live jazz. There, a scout from Tops Records discovered them. The trio recorded 2 albums, including Sweet Georgia Brown and Billy Tipton Plays Hi-Fi on Piano, which featured soulful renditions of jazz standards. By 1957, their albums were selling thousands of copies, a big deal for an indie jazz act. Hollywood began to notice. In 1958, everything could have changed. Billy was offered a prestigious house band position at Reno's Holiday Hotel, with the chance to open for Liberace and record more albums in Hollywood. But he turned it all down. Fame brought cameras. Fame brought questions. And fame would have meant exposure. Instead, he stayed in Spokane, Washington, working as a club performer and later as a talent booker. In those same clubs, Hollywood actors like Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall sometimes passed through. Billy was quietly a part of that world. He knew the scenes, the networks, the famous faces, but he kept his own secrets tightly guarded. Behind the music, his personal life was even more complicated. Billy married 5 different women, always as a man. He told them he had old war injuries that prevented sex. They believed him. His final long-term partner was Kitty Kelly, a nightclub dancer he married in 1960. They stayed together for 20 years and adopted 3 sons, John, Scott, and William. Billy was a caring father. He went to PTA meetings, coached Little League, took them on vacations. But all that time, he was suffering physically. Years of chest binding had permanently damaged his ribs and internal tissues. Still, he never went to a doctor. Even as arthritis set in and the pain worsened, he kept treating himself. When he retired from performing in the 1970s, the damage had already been done. In January 1989, Billy collapsed from what he thought was a bad case of emphysema. In reality, it was a bleeding peptic ulcer. He refused to go to a hospital. When paramedics arrived at the Spokane home, they discovered the truth. Billy Tipton was biologically female. His son, William, was in the room when it happened. What followed was a media explosion. The National Enquirer and Star plastered headlines like, "He was a she," and news programs turned his life into a tabloid circus. Talk shows invited Kitty and the sons to speak. Some sons felt betrayed, some confused, some defended him. Legal battles erupted over his estate. 2 different wills named only William Jr. as heir, but the court divided the $35,000 equally. The money barely mattered compared to the shock. Wilmer "Little Axe" Broadnax. Wilmer Broadnax was born on December 28, 1916, in Houston, Texas. He was small in size, only about 5 feet tall, but his voice was anything but small. He had a high, powerful tenor that could make crowds stop and listen, and that voice would take him from local church groups all the way to Hollywood movie soundtracks. People called him Little Axe to match his brother, William, who was taller and went by Big Axe. Together, they sang gospel music that moved people to tears. But there was something about Wilmer that no one knew. He had lived his whole adult life as a man, but he had been assigned female at birth. No one ever guessed it, not even the people he worked with closely for years. That secret didn't come out until after his death in 1992. For more than 70 years, he passed as male in a world where being different wasn't safe, especially not in the deeply religious gospel world. Growing up, Wilmer's life wasn't easy. His mother, Gussie Frazier, remarried in 1927, and the family began living with a stepfather named Augustus Flowers. By the time of the 1930 census, Wilmer was just 13 and already presenting as male. Some historians think he might have taken over the identity of an older brother, or that his sister Armatha, who also appeared in the census, may have lived as a man later in life. Either way, Wilmer was already living as a boy by that time. That same year, Gussie died of tuberculosis. It shattered the family, and Wilmer turned even more deeply to gospel music as an escape. In the late 1930s, he began performing with the St. Paul Gospel Singers in Houston, standing beside his brother. His voice was unforgettable, high, emotional, almost fierce. People often thought he had a falsetto, but it was his real voice. It sounded even more stunning when layered with deep baritones like Paul Foster. In 1939, Wilmer and William moved to Los Angeles. They joined the Southern Gospel Singers, a weekend group that didn't tour since the members all had weekday jobs. But Wilmer wanted more. In the early 1940s, he started his own group called Little Axe and the Golden Echoes. They quickly became a popular touring act, and in 1949, they even recorded When the Saints Go Marching In for Specialty Records. But the label dropped them after just one song. The group split up soon after, but Wilmer didn't stop. That same year, he joined the Spirit of Memphis Quartet. It was a huge step forward. He recorded powerful songs like When Mother's Gone and made up to $200 a week, a big paycheck at the time, worth about $2,400 today. He sang alongside big names like Silas Steele and helped the group become one of the highest-paid gospel quartets in the country. They performed everywhere and recorded non-stop. Wilmer's voice wasn't just famous in churches. It was also quietly making waves in Hollywood. Filmmakers during the 1940s, 50s, and 60s wanted real gospel voices to give their movies more emotion, especially in scenes showing Black life or church communities. Wilmer's recordings were used to bring soul to some of the biggest films of the era. In 1954, his voice could be heard in Carmen Jones, a film that earned an Oscar nomination and starred Dorothy Dandridge. In 1958, his gospel tracks helped shape the emotional scenes in The Defiant Ones, starring Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis. And in 1972, His voice added deep feeling to Sounder, a movie nominated for 4 Academy Awards. His singing gave those films a kind of raw, spiritual truth that few others could deliver. Many times he wasn't credited, but his work left a deep impression. Over the years, his voice ended up in more than a dozen major films. He stayed active in gospel music into the 1960s, even as rock and roll took over the spotlight. He performed with other legendary groups like the Fairfield Four and the Five Blind Boys of Mississippi. Through it all, no one ever suspected he had a secret. Wilmer lived his entire life as a man, kept his past to himself, and never seemed to break character. Not even once. That's what made what happened in 1992 so shocking. On June 1st, he was 75 years old and living in Philadelphia. During a domestic argument, his girlfriend, Lavina Richardson, fatally stabbed him. When doctors at the hospital performed the autopsy, they discovered that Wilmer had female genitalia. The news stunned the gospel world. Some said it explained his unusually high voice and small frame. Others were simply speechless. But what stood out most was how he had managed to live an entire lifetime in the spotlight without anyone ever knowing. Mountain Charlie Charlotte Darky Parkhurst was born in 1812 in Lebanon, New Hampshire. But no one who met her on the California frontier would have ever guessed that name. For more than 30 years, she lived as Charlie Parkhurst, chewing tobacco, cracking whips, and steering 6-horse stagecoaches through some of the deadliest trails in the West. She looked like a rugged man, acted like one, and fooled thousands right up until her death in 1879. That's when the truth finally came out. It happened inside a small cabin near Watsonville, California. It was December 28th. Undertakers were preparing the body of the legendary One-Eyed Charlie for burial. That's when they discovered something that stunned everyone who'd ever shared a drink, a road, or a poker table with her. Charlie Parkhurst was a woman, and no one had known. The shock spread fast. Newspapers across the country ran with the story. Headlines screamed it. Locals couldn't believe it, but there it was, plain as day. The tough, tobacco-spitting stagecoach legend had carried one of the boldest secrets the West had ever seen. She hadn't just dressed like a man, she lived like one. She'd escaped an orphanage as a child, put on boys' clothes, and never looked back. By the 1850s, she was working stables, then driving stagecoaches for Wells Fargo, deep into California's gold rush country. These weren't easy routes. They twisted through cliffs and canyons. One bad move could send a coach and horses tumbling into nothing. But Charlie didn't flinch. She drove them hard, fast, and with a reputation that grew bigger by the mile. In 1860, a horse kicked her in the face. Some said it got spooked by a rattlesnake. Either way, she lost her left eye. From then on, she wore a black eye patch and picked up a new name, One-Eyed Charlie. And the myth only got bigger. She once shot and killed a highway robber trying to hold up her coach. Some say it was an outlaw called Sugarfoot. Others say no one ever dared to rob her again after that. She could snap a whip so sharply she'd knock a fly off a horse's ear. She could outdrink most miners, outgamble the best of them. And when she voted in the presidential election of 1868 in Soquel, California, she did it under her male name, becoming the first known woman to vote in U.S. history without anyone realizing it at the time. Everything about her was carefully hidden. She wore gloves to cover her hands, which were softer than they should have been. She kept to herself, slept in barns, talked with a high, raspy voice, and never let anyone get too close. By the 1860s, years of riding in snow and sun had taken their toll. Her joints ached, and her body was wearing out, so she opened a stage station near Santa Cruz with a partner named Frank Woodward. Together, they ran freight, raised cattle, and built a life. She saved up nearly $10,000 before she retired. That was serious money back then. And then came Hollywood. Her life was too good not to steal. In the 1940s and 50s, her story inspired at least 3 Western films. But there was a catch. Studios couldn't handle the truth, so they changed it. In Highway 13, 1949, The Stage to Tucson, 1951, and The Quicksilver Trail, 1954. Her wild rides, robberies, and near-death escapes were all there. But the characters were men. They kept the eye patch, the grit, the courage. They just left out the part that mattered most. Even so, her legend stuck around. A 1969 article in the New York Times called her one of California's wildest spirits, saying the only thing remotely feminine about her was how much she liked children. Everything else, her voice, her cards, her cigars, her cattle, was straight out of the West's roughest pages. There's still a plaque on her grave in Watsonville that reads, Charlie Darky Parkhurst, 1812-1879, first woman to vote in the U.S. A housing complex in Santa Cruz was named after her in 2007, and estimates say she drove over 100,000 miles in her career. That's more than most of her fellow drivers, male or female. Jack B. Garland. Jack B. Garland was born on December 9, 1869, in San Francisco, California. The name given at birth was Elvira Virginia Mugarieta, and the family was well known. Her father, José Marcos Mugarieta, served as the Mexican consul, and her grandfather had been a justice on the Louisiana Supreme Court. But despite this prestigious background, Garland's life would soon break away from every rule society had written for someone like her. Assigned female at birth, Garland never accepted the life that was expected. At 15, she ran away from a convent school by marrying her brother's friend. But the marriage didn't last long. She left soon after and kept going. By the time she was 28, it was 1897, and she was fully living as a man. That alone was enough to get her arrested, more than once. In Stockton, California, she was charged with impersonating a male, which was considered a crime at the time. To avoid more trouble, she came up with a bold plan. She took the name Babe Bean and pretended to be mute, only communicating by writing notes. With that trick, she managed to live quietly on a houseboat on McLeod's Lake, and even got a job as a journalist for the Stockton Evening Mail. Her writing was sharp and unafraid. She exposed problems like gambling, poverty, and corruption, and the public took notice. What they didn't know was that she was hiding one of the biggest secrets of all, and she kept that secret safe for over 2 years. Things got even wilder in 1899. Now 30 years old, Garland took on a new name, B.B. Beam, and pulled off something almost unbelievable. She disguised herself as a cabin boy and snuck aboard a U.S. Army transport ship heading to the Philippines during the Spanish-American War. It was the city of Para, and the plan nearly fell apart when she got sick on the voyage. On October 5, 1899, the ship's captain discovered her biological sex and left her behind in Hawaii. But the soldiers she had befriended didn't turn their backs. They raised $50, dressed her in uniform again, and smuggled her back onto the ship, hiding her until they were far from port. She was caught a second time and briefly confined, but she escaped again, determined to follow the troops. For nearly a year, she moved across Luzon, working as a nurse, a Spanish interpreter, and an unofficial war correspondent, without ever enlisting and without ever carrying a weapon. She was there during some of the most dangerous moments, including the Battle of San Mateo on December 19, 1899. She marched through Manila, Santa Cruz, Laguna de Bay, Camarines, and Caloocan, treating wounded soldiers while surrounded by gunfire, tropical disease, and chaos. And when she finally returned to the U.S. in 1900, she shared her story in the San Francisco Examiner under the title My Life as a Soldier, published on October 21st. It was dramatic, gripping, and honest, except for one thing. She left out the part about her gender. In the years that followed, Garland's life stayed just as unpredictable. By 1903, San Francisco had passed laws banning cross-dressing, so she changed her name one last time to Jack B. Garland. Under that name, she went back to journalism and focused on something new: the rising film industry in Southern California. Between 1915 and 1917, she wrote more than 20 articles for the San Francisco Examiner in a series called The Moving Picture Men. She covered the birth of Hollywood with a sharp eye and a clear sense of how fake it all was. In a 1916 article, she warned that studios were creating entirely new people and that actors were being forced to wear masks both on and off camera. Her words cut deep, especially since she had lived a life behind masks of her own. She had met people like Charlie Chaplin and Mary Pickford and saw the cracks in the system early. Her writing revealed a part of Hollywood that most people never noticed: how identity, gender, and image were being bent into something unreal. After the earthquake that hit San Francisco in 1906, Garland was 37 years old and working with the Red Cross. She helped care for over 250,000 people who had lost their homes. That work continued for decades. She spent 30 years handing out aid to homeless men in the Tenderloin district. Her body was thin, tattooed from her time in the Philippines, and she lived openly as a man. She also formed romantic and sexual relationships with young men, making her one of the earliest recorded examples of a trans man who was attracted to men. Her true identity stayed hidden until the very end. On September 19, 1936, she collapsed on a street corner in San Francisco from a ruptured ulcer and died of peritonitis. She was 66 years old. When doctors examined her body, they discovered the truth. News of her biological sex spread fast. The headlines were loud and dramatic. Jack B. was woman, and the city was stunned. She had carried her secret for 40 years. At the time of her death, she had just $1 in her wallet, a Masonic pin, and no family to claim her body. She was buried in a pauper's grave, weighing only 104 pounds. But the story didn't disappear. Decades later, a transgender activist named Lou Sullivan discovered her life and published a biography in 1990 called From Female to Male. He uncovered more than 150 old newspaper clippings that painted Garland as a trousered enigma, someone who managed to outsmart war, society, and even Hollywood itself. Her life challenged every idea the 19th and early 20th centuries had about gender. Sir Lady Java. Sir Lady Java was born in New Orleans on August 20, 1942. From the very beginning, her life refused to follow the rules of the time. She was assigned male at birth, but by her teenage years, she had already started transitioning, something almost unheard of in the deeply conservative South of the 1940s. What made it even more shocking was that her mother fully supported her. In a time when being different could cost you everything, Java's journey started with love and defiance. As a young adult, she moved to Los Angeles, hoping to turn her dreams into reality. She didn't start out on stage. First, she worked at the Red Fox Club on La Cienega Boulevard, waiting tables. But it didn't take long for people to notice her talent. Soon, she was performing exotic dances, singing, telling jokes, and doing impersonations of famous stars like Lena Horne, Mae West, and Josephine Baker. Her stage name was just as unforgettable as her shows. The Sir Lady part was her way of owning the title of female impersonator, while Java came from a random stranger who once told her she was deep, dark, and delicious like coffee. Instead of being insulted, she embraced it. By the mid-1960s, Sir Lady Java wasn't just performing. She was becoming a legend. She shared stages and friendships with icons like Little Richard, Sammy Davis Jr., Richard Pryor, Red Fox, Flip Wilson, Rudy Ray Moore, LaWanda Page, and Don Rickles. Many of these stars came from Hollywood's golden years, and their support helped shield her in a world that often tried to silence people like her. But no amount of fame could protect her from the law. On October 21, 1967, after a 2-week performance run, the LAPD shut down her shows. They used something called Rule Number 9, a city ordinance that made it illegal to perform as a person of the opposite sex without a special permit. It had only been enforced since September that year, and it gave police the power to fine clubs or even shut them down. For Java, it was a direct attack not just on her art, but on her very existence. She didn't stay quiet. That same day, she stood outside the Red Fox Club with protest signs, demanding her right to work. Then, with help from the ACLU, she filed a lawsuit claiming Rule 9 violated her rights. She was making a living off her shows, doing 2 per night, and this law took it away. The case reached California's Supreme Court, but in 1967, it was dismissed because only club owners were allowed to file, and none wanted to fight the LAPD. Still, her actions were not in vain. In 1969, Rule 9 was overturned thanks to another case that built on the momentum she had started. What made her struggle even harder was that she was not just transgender, she was black. This meant she had to face racism and transphobia at the same time. The Civil Rights Act had only passed a few years earlier in 1964, but queer rights were still far behind. Even so, Java kept performing. In 1978, she was seen again with Lena Horne at a private birthday party. She acted in blaxploitation films and appeared in magazines like Jet and Variety. But in the 1980s, a stroke forced her to step away from public life. Years later, she made a quiet return. In 2016, she appeared as a guest of honor at Trans Pride LA, standing beside younger activists like CeCe McDonald. In 2022, she became the Community Grand Marshal at the Los Angeles Pride Parade. Sir Lady Java passed away on November 16, 2024, in Los Angeles at age 82. Her death came from complications related to a stroke, but her legacy still lives. The legal battles she started helped pave the way for future protections, including the 2020 Supreme Court decision that gave LGBTQ+ workers protection under U.S. law. What few people know is that many Golden Age stars privately supported her, even attending her shows behind the scenes to avoid scandal.